He once dated Elizabeth Taylor, slept in the White House, and made millions. Now, at 85, George Hamilton faces a heartbreaking reality. The cancer has returned, his fortune is gone, and the mansion he lived in for decades must be sold. From high society romance to the fight for survival, this is the tragic end that no one saw coming. Born in Memphis, Tennessee, in 1939, George Hamilton seemed destined for stardom from the start. His father was a famous bandleader, and his mother was a Southern belle from Arkansas. This blend of big city flair and Southern charm would define George's image for years to come. But life wasn't always as glamorous as it seemed. By the time George was 5, his parents' marriage crumbled after his father's affair with a singer in his band. His mother, left to raise 3 children alone during wartime, faced unimaginable challenges. The emotional aftermath of the divorce would haunt George for years, forever altering the course of his life. His father, abandoning the family, moved to New York and left the music industry to sell perfume. He died young in 1957, but for George, the damage had already been done. What followed was a childhood marked by instability. No longer staying in luxurious hotels or surrounded by music, George found himself in the quiet town of Blytheville, Arkansas, living with his grandparents. For a short while, life was peaceful. George bonded with his grandparents, soaking in the Southern values that would stay with him forever. But in 1947, tragedy struck again when both grandparents died. The foundation of stability George had found disappeared in an instant. His mother, struggling and desperate, had no choice but to make a drastic decision. She flipped a coin. Heads, New York. Tails, Hollywood. The coin landed on Hollywood, and the family packed up and left for California. It was here, at just 8 years old, that George began to feel the allure of Hollywood. But this dream didn't come without its struggles. By 1950, the family moved again, this time to the East Coast. George was shuffled between schools until he landed at Gulf Coast Military Academy in Mississippi, where his life began to take shape. Military Academy instilled discipline, poise, and charm, qualities that would define his public persona. Stood out, not just for his manners but for his composed nature. Beneath this polished exterior, George's private life remained turbulent, marked by a secretive, strained relationship with his stepmother that would haunt him for years. At 19, George's life took a dramatic turn. He landed a screen test with MGM, despite having no formal acting training, just raw charisma and a high school acting award. Broken, barely scraping by, George was lucky enough to secure an agent who believed in his potential. MGM gave him a shot, offering him a small role in Crime and Punishment USA. It wasn't a glamorous debut, and the directors didn't even want him. They preferred Anthony Perkins. But George proved them wrong. He delivered a performance so powerful and intense, it left critics stunned. He played a law student who kills a pawnbroker and is haunted by his guilt. Somehow, George made the character both chilling and vulnerable, and it paid off. He won a Golden Globe for Most Promising Newcomer and even earned a BAFTA nomination. Yet, despite this early success, Hollywood still didn't take him seriously. The industry's unpredictability hit hard. One moment, you're the next big thing. The next, you're struggling for work. During this time, George made another bold move. He began tanning, not for vanity, but to create a brand. In a town full of handsome men, he wanted to stand out. His deep, rich tan became his signature, instantly recognizable, and a symbol of his identity in Hollywood. Rivalry with actor John Derek over who could get the darkest tan became a playful, yet defining part of George's public persona. His tan became more than just a look. It was a statement, a way to stay relevant even when his acting roles began to dwindle. Came Where the Boys Are in 1960. George played a charming, rich college boy, and the film became an instant hit. It captured the spirit of a changing America, clean-cut and romantic, just as the nation was on the verge of a cultural shift. The movie may have strayed from the political themes of the original book, but it resonated with audiences, and George's star shone brighter. George thought it was just a light, silly film, but audiences couldn't get enough of it. What started as a casual project ended up launching George into heartthrob status. He even improvised one of the film's most iconic moments, writing a question mark in the sand next to his co-star. That tiny detail sealed his place in pop culture history. The film, Where the Boys Are, quietly reflected major shifts in American culture, capturing the changing tides of sex and romance in society. Even decades later, scholars would point to George's role as part of the larger conversation about gender, courtship, and how Hollywood shaped modern life. But in 1965, his career would take a turn, catching the attention of a much more powerful figure, President Lyndon B. Johnson. That's how George found himself seated at a White House dinner, where he met Linda Bird Johnson, the president's bookish, reserved daughter. She was quiet, presidential royalty. He was bold, smooth, and from the world of Hollywood. But somehow, they clicked. George later said he could tell there was something wild beneath her calm demeanor. Their romance quickly became the talk of the country. They were everywhere, on red carpets, in Acapulco, celebrating Easter at the LBJ Ranch. At the Academy Awards, they stole the show. Bob Hope famously joked that Linda didn't need a watch because she already had a Hamilton. But behind the glamour, there was tension brewing. President Lyndon B. Johnson was not happy about his daughter dating George. He didn't trust him, not just because George was a Hollywood actor, but because he feared something more. And so, like any powerful father, he did the unthinkable. He ordered an FBI investigation. It wasn't your typical background check. This was personal. Johnson went straight to the top, asking Supreme Court Justice Abe Fortas and FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover to dig deep into George's life. They wanted everything: his friends, his credit cards, his family, and even the rumors swirling about his sexuality. George's brother was gay, and in the charged atmosphere of the time, that alone was a red flag. Back then, even a whisper about a person's sexuality could destroy their career. The FBI kept searching, but nothing damaging surfaced. Still, they didn't stop. The investigation kept going, and just when George thought the worst was behind him, things got even stranger. One day, George received an unexpected call from the White House. He was summoned to Texas, no questions asked. When he arrived, President Johnson took him straight into the woods on a surprise hunting trip. He handed George a rifle and gave him a look that said this wasn't about hunting at all. George played along, fired the gun, and even managed to impress the president. Finally, Johnson cracked a smile and, with a nod, compared George to frontiersman Daniel Boone. But George knew exactly what was happening. This wasn't a hunting trip, it was a test. A test of manhood, loyalty, and control. And George, ever the smooth operator, passed with flying colors. But there was another storm on the horizon: his draft status. George had avoided military service by claiming he was the primary supporter of his mother and brothers. But that didn't sit well with the press and government officials. After all, his mother was living like royalty in Beverly Hills. The president, already furious about the Vietnam War, saw George's dodging of the draft as a scandal waiting to explode. If George was going to date the president's daughter, he couldn't also dodge the draft. Lyndon B. Johnson never said it outright, but the message was crystal clear: either join the war or get out of my family. The pressure was immense, and in late 1966, the romance came to a quiet end. Here's the twist: George didn't burn any bridges. When Linda married Marine Captain Charles Robb in 1967, George showed up at the wedding, smiling, posing for photos like it was just another Hollywood premiere. He kept in touch with the couple over the years. Even after Robb became governor of Virginia, the bond never fully faded. In fact, in 2012, decades after the headlines had long since faded, the Robbs went to see George perform on stage in Washington, D.C. They even had him over for dinner. It was a reminder that even after all those years, the connection between them never really disappeared. George Hamilton never became the president's son-in-law, but for a brief, surreal moment in the 1960s, he came closer than any Hollywood actor ever had. By the late 1970s, George's Hollywood spotlight had dimmed. But then, in 1979, a surprising twist brought him back into the limelight. He took on the role of Count Dracula in a comedy called Love at First Bite. No one expected much from the film, but George didn't just act in it, he helped produce it. And to everyone's shock, the movie became a surprise hit. Rather than playing Dracula straight, George leaned into the absurd, turning the character into a disco-dancing, joke-cracking sensation. The film was a box office success, and it redefined how Hollywood saw George. No longer just the handsome heartthrob, he became known for his sharp comic timing and business savvy. The film's success not only revived his career but also solidified his place in the industry. George Hamilton was back, and with a vengeance. That same boldness showed up in his personal life, too. In 1972, George's marriage to Alana Collins sounded like something straight out of a movie. It all began when George was hanging out with Colonel Tom Parker, Elvis Presley's manager, when Alana dropped by to pick up her things before flying back to England. Out of the blue, Parker suggested they just get married right then and there. They did, on Elvis' private jet, in his suite, with a judge waiting and a little dog standing in as the maid of honor. They even managed to hit the roulette table, though George lost $15,000. But in the end, he came home with a wife. Their love story had started years earlier in Acapulco, where they couldn't stand each other. But somewhere between a pinch, a slap, and a whirlwind romance, it turned into something more. Years later, their son Ashley was born. For someone famously known as a playboy, George took to fatherhood in a surprisingly grounded way. When filming Medusa in Greece, he turned it into a family honeymoon. Ashley, his son, would later follow in his footsteps, becoming an actor in films like Beethoven's Second and Iron Man 3. Even after George and Alana divorced, they continued raising Ashley together. But George didn't stop there. He also built close ties with Alana's children from her later marriage to Rod Stewart. It was an unusual family dynamic, but somehow, it worked. Most Hollywood divorces are cold or chaotic, but not theirs. Though George and Alana split in 1975, they never truly let go of each other. They remained best friends, talking every day, having dinner together. Their bond endured, a testament to how love and family can transcend the typical Hollywood script. Alana drove because George was always running late. They often joked about getting remarried, but in truth, they didn't need to. What they had was better than most marriages. George once admitted that after their divorce, he would catch himself missing something, and then realize it was her. They had long moved past being a couple and into something far deeper. Alana summed it up perfectly. I have his back, and I know he has mine. But life had one more storm in store for George Hamilton. In 1979, he flew to the Philippines to promote his vampire comedy Love at First Bite. It was the biggest moment of his career, and he was riding high, until he received an unexpected invitation to lunch at the presidential palace. There, he would meet the country's powerful First Lady, Imelda Marcos. What started as a simple lunch quickly evolved into a globe-spanning friendship filled with glamour, secrets, and eventually, scandal. Imelda was instantly charmed by Hamilton, and their bond grew quickly. They traveled the world together, shopped side by side, and even sang songs in private. What appeared to be nothing more than a harmless celebrity friendship began to reveal a much darker side. That same year, Hamilton also met two powerful figures from Imelda's inner circle: Antonio Florendo, a wealthy businessman who profited from his ties to the Marcos regime, and Gletzi Tantico, Imelda's closest friend and personal shopping agent. These weren't mere background players. They were key figures in a web of shady deals, secret loans, and millions of dollars that somehow passed through Hamilton's hands. In 1982, Hamilton received a $600,000 loan from Florendo, claiming it was for the refinancing of his Mississippi plantation. But the timing raised more than a few eyebrows. This loan came just 2 months after Hamilton attended the opulent Manila Film Festival, where guests sipped $100 French champagne and dined on roasted cows. It wasn't long before investigators uncovered something far more troubling. Around $12 million may have flowed through Hamilton's accounts. In one case, he even traveled to Hong Kong to collect $5 million from Tantico's bank account, money that prosecutors believe came directly from the Philippine Treasury. Shortly after, Hamilton began remodeling his Beverly Hills home, adding a massive garage and expanding his living space. Authorities believed the money was used to fund those renovations. And it didn't stop there. Imelda's team even looked into buying the property next door, supposedly to expand Hamilton's estate. Some speculated that the house wasn't really his at all, but a Marcos property hidden under his name. The wildest twist came with a failed movie project. Hamilton had plans to make a film about General Douglas MacArthur. Initially, it was intended to be an action-packed war story, but under pressure from Imelda's inner circle, the script was reworked into something completely different. A romantic drama about MacArthur's unrequited love for a Filipino woman. Hamilton later admitted how deeply embarrassing the change was. The iconic line, "I shall return," was reimagined, no longer a declaration of wartime triumph, but a romantic proclamation. In the end, the film never got made, and the $5.5 million was quietly returned to a Hong Kong bank. Prosecutors later claimed the entire project was a front, part of a money laundering scheme designed to move stolen funds across the globe. By 1988, Hamilton's name appeared in a federal indictment. While he wasn't charged, he was named as an unindicted co-conspirator in a case against Imelda and Ferdinand Marcos. It was a devastating blow to his reputation. In the aftermath, Hamilton defended himself in the press, insisting that he was nothing more than a friend to Imelda, claimed he never did any business with her and that his attendance at her film festival had been purely out of courtesy. But the facts told a much messier story. George admitted receiving millions, testified in court, and continued to defend the Marcoses even after they were accused of embezzling over $100 million from the people of the Philippines. The legal team tried to paint him as an innocent Southern gentleman, someone who wouldn't even discuss business with Imelda. They claimed he had no idea where the money was coming from and returned everything once he realized something was amiss. But behind the scenes, the truth didn't line up so neatly. Florendo, the man who had given George the loan, later admitted that Imelda had pulled all the strings, decided where the money went, who controlled it, and how it was used. According to some, even George's house may have been part of her hidden empire. In court, Hamilton maintained that he may have been used, but never knowingly. Insisted he didn't see the red flags. Although he avoided formal charges, the damage to his reputation was already done. His friendship with Imelda had dragged him into one of the most notorious corruption scandals of the 20th century. Millions had vanished, reputations were shattered, and a forgotten war movie might have been the cover for it all. But then, in the mid-1980s, something strange happened on the set of Poker Allard. George was starring alongside none other than Elizabeth Taylor. Their chemistry wasn't just for the cameras, it spilled over into real life. The two dated for about a year, and even after their breakup, they remained close. The real shock came much later. Elizabeth sent George a breakup gift, an actual solid gold ace of hearts from Cartier. On the back, it read, "Dearest George, I love you even though you were an asshole." George found it hilarious. To him, it wasn't just a joke, it was a strange but sweet way of saying, "We're always connected." That was Elizabeth, fierce, funny, unforgettable. And George never forgot her. But Elizabeth wasn't the only beauty in George's life. During a reality show appearance in 2009, George casually dropped a bombshell. He had dated at least 4 Miss World winners. He didn't name names, but the message was clear. The man had a type, and that type was global royalty in high heels. Back in the 60s and 70s, George was everywhere, red carpets, film sets, magazine covers, and always with a different beauty by his side. And Burt Reynolds once joked about it, gifting him a birthday card with a photo mashup of Tony Curtis and Anthony Perkins labeled, "To George, love from Mom and Dad." George thought it was hilarious, showing it to everyone he could. But in 1995, George's love life took a more serious turn when he met Kimberly Blackford, a 20-year-old swimsuit model. George was 56. Hollywood, of course, shrugged it off. That's just George. But this wasn't just another fling. George and Kimberly stayed together for 4 years, and during that time, they had a son named George Thomas Hamilton, GT, for short. Though George didn't marry Kimberly, he made sure to stay actively involved in his son's life. GT was raised with the kind of old-school discipline George himself had grown up with. He sent him to a military academy, just like he did with his older son, Ashley. Age gap between George and GT was significant, 60 years to be exact. But somehow, they bonded in a way that stunned everyone. GT grew up calm, ambitious, and well-mannered, traits George admired deeply. Fatherhood, he felt, had given him a second chance, and he was determined to get it right. Despite Alana remarrying Rod Stewart and having 2 more children, George remained close to her family. He even became a second father figure to Rod's kids, and in 2015, this unusual blended family starred in Stewart's and Hamilton's, a surprisingly functional reality show. George and Alana still talk daily, visit, and joke like old friends, with Alana driving since George is always running late. After all the marriages and complications, they'd found a version of family. George's life wasn't all glamour. As a child, he lost hearing in his left ear after contracting measles, a condition doctors later said was permanent nerve damage. Still, an old friend, Gloria Swanson, convinced him to try an experimental treatment in Switzerland. Painful, unproven procedure worked. He regained 95% of his hearing in a month, surprising even the other celebrities seeking their own miracles there. Fast forward to 2025, George faced another life-threatening health scare. His heart valve was failing. At 86, most would have feared the worst. But George underwent open heart surgery and walked out 2 days later. His doctors were stunned by his swift recovery, attributing it to his strict diet of kale, almonds, and other superfoods. His heart rate even dropped to athlete levels. His recovery was so impressive that his doctors began using it as a case study. In an unexpected turn, George launched his own skincare line, the George Hamilton Skincare System. After decades of sunbathing, he marketed creams that promised to reverse sun damage. The line made over $4 million in its first year, though the trend faded by 1993 as new celebrities entered the skincare game and his products quietly disappeared. George wasn't done with the sun yet. Alongside launching his skincare line, he opened a chain of tanning salons during a time when experts were warning about the dangers of tanning. Claimed his beds were safer and could provide a little joy and color. Despite backlash, his salons thrived across California, Florida, and Arizona. But in 1992, lawsuits from customers who developed skin cancer forced him to settle, and in 2011, George had to have cancerous cells removed from his own skin. His tanning empire faded, yet, George staged a remarkable comeback. In 2016, at 77, he landed a multi-million-dollar ad campaign as KFC's Extra Crispy Colonel, embracing his tan and laughing at himself. campaign went viral, boosting sales and reminding the public that George was still relevant. He'd also appeared on the British reality show I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here, in 2009, where he gained new fans and more TV offers. 2015, his reality show Stewarts and Hamiltons introduced his son, GT, to the world, cementing his status as a brand. In early 2025, George made headlines again by moving back to Palm Beach at 85, after losing $12 million to a dishonest business manager. Florida's asset laws helped protect his remaining wealth. George rejoined the social scene and cracked jokes about running for mayor, proving he could survive anything. Nearly 86, George embraced aging, starting his days with meditation and swimming. His health scares only motivated him more. His story wasn't just about reinvention, it was about family. Raising 2 sons, he was absent during his first son Ashley's childhood but became a hands-on father to GT, born when George was 60. GT gave George a second chance at life, and now, GT is pursuing politics, carrying the Hamilton name into the next generation.